Hi, it's a pleasure and honor to speak to you today, and I'm really excited about this topic, and even in investigating it, I learned a lot, so I hope to be able to pass that on to you. So today we're going to be focusing on diet in MS, but before we even get to that topic, we'll be talking about something known as the gut-brain axis, because diet in MS is directly related to our digestive system, and we'll see how this works out. So there's a concept that surfaced in the literature these days, and it's gained so much traction. It's called the gut-brain axis. And this is the relationship of the gut to the brain. And unlike other theories and ideas that have fallen to the wayside, the gut-brain axis seems to have some underlying validity such that researchers are now looking into it. It surfaced in the lay journals. We see it in Psychology Today and Scientific American. And I just mentioned, as Mary Kay did, we came back from a scientific meeting about MS. It's an international meeting in which this topic was specifically addressed to look at the role of the gut in patients with MS. And the relationship of the gut is so important that there's even blog sites about this on the internet when you take a look. In terms of the relationship of the gut to MS, from a practical point of view, we would think that the gut would be modifiable by the contents that we put into it, namely our diet. And so because of this, the looking at the gut has taken on a whole new momentum. And even as we speak now, even aside from doing research in animal models, this is being looked at in patients. According to experts' opinion, then, how should we be thinking about diet? Should people with MS eat healthfully? Raise your hand if you think so. Yes, okay, resounding yes. All right. Are there changes that you can incorporate into your diet? Again, yes. Now, does following a healthy diet have potential benefit in improving fatigue, concentration, constipation, your general health and weight loss? Yes. Good, okay, we're getting the idea here. However, should one put aside their MS medication and just follow diet only? No. Not according to MS experts, no. So now we're building the understanding of the role diet plays in MS. So let's look at the digestive system itself. The digestive system is made of the mouth or the oral cavity, followed by the esophagus, going into the stomach, and the small and the large intestine. The digestive system has different functions. And so it's a continuous tube. In the mouth, we break down foods into small parts, and then we chemically reduce them to their basic constituents of fatty acids, amino acids, and sugar. And then the gut functions to absorb these molecules into the bloodstream, and, as you know, to eliminate the undesirable portions as well, too. And so one can think of the gut as being an extension of our exterior going into the interior to separate our real insides, for example, the bloodstream, from the components that are not fit to use. I hadn't thought about that before myself. In fact, the gut is so important that really every animal has some version of this same tube. The gut is so large that if you were to unfold it with all its ins and outs, it would be the length of a football field. Let's look at the composition of the gut. The terminology that we use are called microbiota and microbiome. We live in association with a huge, huge population of microorganisms. And these microorganisms are acting in a beneficial way, but can also cause what a problem, which we call pathology. And it's the living together is actually what I would say is a win-win situation, because the microbes win. They have a place to live and they have a ready food supply. And as people living in concert with these microorganisms, they do the jobs for absorption and breaking down and helping us use the foods that we put in. So there's such a rich diversity of these microbes that there's up to 1,000 species of microorganisms in our gut. The whole collection of all these microorganisms are known as the microbiota, where the genome or the DNA of these microorganisms is known as the microbiome collectively. And this is one of the organisms that you might find roaming around in your gut. How does this all begin? Well, the fetus actually has a sterile gut. But on birth, it starts to be populated by these microorganisms. So through maternal transfer, through diet, through the environment, and through even antibiotics, the gut is eventually seeded until about 1 year of age. Each child has an individual and unique composition of these microorganisms in his gut or her gut. And then thinking about it and even looking at this cute little picture here, I thought, okay, well, there might be some similarities because every 1-year-old seems to eat chocolate cake for their first birthday. So maybe at least at age 1, these kids have some commonalities in their guts. And we'll learn later that chocolate cake maybe is not the best choice for establishing a healthy gut as well. So what are the roles of the microbiota? We're going to be using that term from now on, either that or the microbiome. And so it has 3 main roles. In defending against pathogen colonization, it does that by competition. So the good microbes outweigh the bad ones and help to maintain a healthy gut. There's a barrier, just like we talk about the blood-brain barrier in your brain, there's also a barrier in the gut that serves to traffic molecules across the gut. There has to be some transfer because you want nutrients to get in, but you don't really want it to be leaky. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about leaky. And so there's an immunoglobulin, it's called IgA, that helps to maintain that healthy epithelial barrier. And then nutrient absorption works by the metabolizing of these nutrients as they come into our intestine. However, now we know there's a very new and 4th role for the GI tract, specifically the intestines. And this is the role in the immune system. As mentioned, 80% of our immune system resides in the gut. So it's no wonder that researchers, physicians, scientists, especially in those who deal with autoimmune diseases, are now looking at the microbiome and the microbiota. And we have mounting evidence that when this biota is out of balance, it contributes to many diseases, including diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, even autism, and now we're thinking MS by provoking autoimmune activity in the gut that travels to the brain. So what does it mean to have a healthy versus an unhealthy gut? Well, a diverse microbiota, so having all those thousands of various microorganisms is considered a healthy gut. And as I described, to maintain the metabolic, the structural, and the signaling from the gut to other parts of the body. When this diversity, when this richness, instead of having, Busch Stadium filled with 47,000 viewers for a game, if only 20,000 shows up, it looks kind of sparse. So an unhealthy gut occurs when the diversity is altered, and this is called dysbiosis, meaning a dysfunctional gut. And the inability to sustain those functions I talked about and those functions that occur in a healthy gut can lead to metabolic, autoimmune, and even brain disorders. Here's a nice pictorial of it. So it's bidirectional and it's 2-sided. On the right side of the picture, we have abnormal function. On the left side, we have normal function. The picture of the villi, these are the infoldings of the gut, are shown with these little microbes around it, and then we have the gut, and then we have arrows that go in either direction to the brain or down to the intestines themselves. So in stress or disease, when we have alterations in our behavior and how we feel and emotions, there's actually different levels. It alters the levels of the inflammatory cells in the intestines, and this is known, what I was referring to before, as intestinal dysbiosis. On the other hand, when you have a healthy gut, there is normal behavior. Your thinking is better, it's fine. You're feeling, animated and in a good mood. And that's in the presence of healthy levels of inflammatory cells and normal gut microbiota. It's one thing to say that, but what is our understanding of how this communication actually works? It's bidirectional, so it goes from the brain down into the gut, and it comes from the gut and goes back to the brain. There are multiple modes of communication. We call these direct and indirect. So the vagus nerve, it's a cranial nerve. It originates in the brain, and it actually innervates the viscera, or the internal organs of the body. There are endocrine signals that travel from the endocrine glands that go to the gut, and there are immunologic pathways that we're beginning to understand, as well as the neurotransmitters that function in the brain, we'll see are actually also manufactured in the gut, like a gut factory. Here's a diagram that shows this complicated situation. So we have the brain. You can see the vagus nerve coming down. Here's that epithelial barrier. And in the wall of the gut, you have that barrier. And then on the other side, you have all these microorganisms, and even the production of serotonin. You're probably familiar with that. We use serotonin. We target serotonin by some of the antidepressants and other medications that we use. Melatonin, histamine, ACTH. So these all are actually produced in the gut and then can make their way up to the brain and affect your mood, your cognition, and your emotion through the adrenal pituitary axis, which is part of the endocrine system. Signals are sent from another part of the brain. It's called the hypothalamus. And then this makes its way through the pituitary. It sends out other signals, goes to the adrenals, and that gets into the circulation as well. Let's talk about the leaky gut, the marker of an unhealthy gut. So this occurs when that barrier fails to prevent the harmful molecules from entering into the bloodstream. And it's thought when these molecules enter that it elicits an inflammatory response. And we know this by looking at it from the other side. When people were given lactobacillus, and you can find that in fermented foods and some yogurts, it actually restored the integrity of that barrier. So it already gives us an inkling that there's a role for diet. Here's a picture of a leaky gut, and so you can see the many folds. That's the part when we unravel it, the whole intestines and the GI tract becomes the length of the football field. And then it shows an impaired barrier and a normal barrier. So here you can see a normal barrier is these cells are side by side, and in a leaky barrier there's now a channel or a transport mechanism for where molecules can get from the gut into the bloodstream. This has become such a hot topic, and now because of increased technology in elucidating our genome and our DNA, there are large consortiums looking at this. So there's something called the Human Microbiome Project, and they're just cataloging and identifying all these organisms in humans. And we have organisms on the outside and we have organisms in the inside. And it's even now we have this MS Microbiome Consortium, and these are academic centers that are getting together to investigate the microbiome in patients with MS. Are there similarities? Are there differences? What are the roles of treatment, and how does that affect our gut? And so we're just beginning to get the literature on this. This is one of the presentations that I heard at this meeting. And the patterns that are emerging are, yes, it seems that at least there are 2 organisms that are housed in people with MS that have less anti-inflammatory activity than in normal controls, and that immunomodulatory therapy, for example, they looked at glutathione acetate, actually altered the composition of the microbes in the gut. And so we don't have the full understanding yet, but this gives us the sense that we may even be able to design new medications, more designer or targeted type drugs by the role that they play in the gut. So this is exciting news. And this is a picture of how some of that happens. This particular diagram came from an article looking at lupus, but there are some similarities with lupus and MS as both being autoimmune disease. And from animal models, we call this EAE, and autoimmune encephalitis, that it requires microbes, a certain kind of distribution of microbes for the animal models to come down with this MS-like model. And so when germ-free animal models, when germ-free mice were looked at, they don't get EAE because they're germ-free. They don't have any microbes at all. And when they put certain bacteria back into the gut of those mice, then the picture of MS manifested. And some of the other findings were that more people with MS had an antibody response against certain GI, what we call antigens. These are the particles that incite the antibody response. So people had more responses against these antigens than healthy controls. And that, again, the probiotics tended to alleviate the symptoms of MS. And so this picture just shows this, this is the normal side, this is the autoimmune side, and you can see there's a lot more production of autoantibodies on the autoimmune side. So, in addition to autoimmune disorders that I spoke about, we know that there's a role for microbiome in other CNS disorders that we considered: depression, anxiety, stress. I mean, these, if you have MS, these are commonalities. And so at those times of stress, probably not the best diet to reach for. We also know by looking at other disorders that unhealthy dietary patterns are risk factors for depression even in older individuals, and that, interestingly, healthier diets protect against cognitive decline. So all of this is good information for us. Probiotics are nutritional substances that have beneficial live bacteria. This is meant to be a dish of yogurt, and as we mentioned, has anti-inflammatory properties in animal models. And so it's likely that transfers to humans as well. And if you've ever been on an antibiotic, frequently your doctor will tell you, eat some extra yogurt during that time, because the antibiotic is decreasing those microorganisms, and now you want to replenish. What do we know about animal models and diet? This is important. Remember these for when we start to look at human diets. So a high-fat diet increased the severity of the animal model of MS. A high-salt diet did the same thing, increased the severity of the animal model of MS, whereas calorie restriction decreased the symptoms. So how would diet work to help us? It may modulate that microbiome. As I said, one way of modulating the gut is by what you put in it. So, ergo the food or our diet. We know that fiber can make that gut microbiome richer, more diverse, more plentiful, and the less diverse microbiome is less healthy. When you run a low microbiome for a long time, that gets into these chronic situations. It's been looked at in, for example, an irritable bowel, a chronic low inflammatory state, and that's associated with metabolic dysfunction as well. And if you haven't picked up on it yet, I'm trying to keep giving you kind of hints about healthy pictures here. Okay, so now to the heart of the matter, now to the crux of the matter. What is a healthy diet for MS? And can we tailor this diet to alter the microbiome? That's the big question. The diets that are popular these days in MS is number one, the Mediterranean diet. This is endorsed by physicians. We'll talk a little bit more about it. When you start listening and hearing and looking on the internet what some patients with MS are doing, they're looking at the swank, a paleo, and a Walls diet. These are not necessarily endorsed. But we'll take a look and we'll see what they are. Information is always good. So let's take a look at the swank diet. It's not new. It was developed 60 years ago. And it's a low-fat diet, so it advocates eating a maximum of 15 grams of saturated fat, 20 to 50 grams of fat from oils, and no red meat. And now the 20 to 50 grams in oils, this is not saturated. This is unsaturated. For example, like olive oil is highly recommended in the Mediterranean. In the first year, no red meat. And overall, less than 1% fat in dairy products. And then no processed foods containing saturated fat or cod liver oil. A more recent kind of diet is something called the paleo. Has anybody heard of that one? Pretty much it's a buzzword these days. And this is a diet that's reportedly based on how our ancestors 10,000 years ago ate, based on the fact that they were hunters and gatherers. And there's several kinds of recommendations with these. So, okay to eat animal protein, but not so okay, in fact, eliminate grains because you would have had to cultivate that, and as hunters and gatherers, there wasn't time to grow your crops. And the theory is based that we should only eat foods that we were kind of genetically predisposed to consume. I'll be getting into a list of recommended diets looked at by U.S. News and World Report. Every year they come out with a recommended list. And they looked at this diet as well. The health benefits are really unknown, and we don't know if there are risks associated with it by eliminating entire whole food groups, such as grains. It does have an autoimmune protocol, and some people have tried that. This is the autoimmune protocol. It has an elimination phase, and it focuses on nutrient-dense foods. We would eliminate foods that cause this dysbiosis, but the foods that cause that dysbiosis are really, yet to be actually revealed. But this diet says no to grains, legumes, dairies, refined sugars, processed foods, eggs, nuts, seeds, nightshades, those are potatoes, tomatoes, green peppers, and eggplants, fructose and alcohol, but yes to meat, and particular organ meat, so your heart and kind of what they call offal meats, kidneys, fish, shellfish, vegetables. Vegetables are fine on this diet, and fat. So the organ meats here I have them listed out as tripe, heart, brain, kidney, liver. And then we have the other diet I mentioned, which was called Wahls. And this was designed by Dr. Terry Wahls. She's an individual with MS. And she went from a relapsing form of MS to a progressive form of MS and felt that she needed to look more into diet and how could that be altered and see if that would improve her situation. So she created this diet. She has a website. She's authored a book. And she has 3 levels: the Wahls diet, the Wahls with paleo, and the Wahls with paleo plus. The Wahls level 1 is no gluten, no eggs, no dairy, no refined oils, limited sugar, no processed foods. The paleo 2 is limit grains, potatoes, beans, increase meat, include organ meat, seaweed, fermented foods, seeds, raw foods. And the 3 is a ketogenic diet, so that's a very high-fat diet and includes vegetables and coconut oil, no grains, beans, potatoes. That you're allowed to have 1 cup of berries daily, and you should fast intermittently. Here's a little bit closer look at the Wahls versus paleo. So it's refined sugars, no dairy, slowly reduce the beans, no soy, fats are stressed. The amount of vegetables that are advocated is 9 cups of vegetables. Bone broth, because it's thought that there's a lot of richness in the bones, so you're supposed to take bones and make soups out of them. And include, exercise, sleep, fresh air, that's fine. Okay, so let's take a little bit closer look at this Mediterranean diet. It's based on a pyramid in which the bottom or the widest part of the pyramid, is based on fruits, vegetables, grains, whole grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds. So a broad range of healthy foods, grains, fruits, and vegetables. Next up in the tier are fish and seafood, at least twice a week, and then poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt, moderate, and then meat and sweets less often. It comes from the Mediterranean area, so they say drink plenty of water, and then once in a while have a splash of wine. But also be physically active. So US News and World Report did an investigation. This information is from the latest. It was January or February of 2015, and they looked at 35 diets, and their ratings were based on those that were easy to follow, nutritious, safe, effective for weight loss, and protective against diabetes and heart disease. All things that even if you have MS, you certainly want to be cognizant of. And the #1 diet was, the one that was rated #1 is called the DASH. And you may have heard of that from your own doctors, but this is a diet to lower sodium and to lower your risk for heart disease. Up in that top group was also the therapeutic lifestyle diet. Mayo Clinic came out with its own diet, the Mediterranean diet. These were all top-notch diets. Weight Watchers, we don't need to go into that too much. People are familiar with that. Something called flexitarian and volumetrics. Those were, I thought, kind of interesting. So the DASH diet, it was developed by the National Institute of Health to help fight high blood pressure. It stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It's complete, it's safe, it prevents and controls diabetes, and it supports good health. And it's a rather simple diet to follow. It's based on balancing your calorie needs with food intake from these healthy groups. And so you figure out what your calorie intake should be based on your age. And so I don't fall in the 1930, but in other words, I really should only be eating 1,600 calories a day. I work mostly at a desk and in an office, so I'd consider myself to have a sedentary lifestyle. And so I should really be only eating 1,600 calories a day. And you can modify it for your own self. And I thought it's interesting too, males are different from females. And then these are the whole groups. So I took, for example, a 2,000 calorie a day diet, and it gives you the number of servings and examples of foods and what they offer to you. The therapeutic lifestyle diet was to lower cholesterol. This is also from the NIH, so lots of research put into these diets. They have a sound basis. Again, you choose a calorie level, and then you decrease your fat. The Mayo Clinic diet is aimed at weight loss. And these other two, the volumetrics, is really a basis of swapping high caloric foods for less so by volume. So if you would sit and have a plate of fried chicken, for example, substitute that with a plate of vegetables or salad. So you eat the same amount, but you're taking in more healthy and lower calorie food. That's the principles of volumetrics. And flexitarian is just based on being flexible and being vegetarian and using what they call as the new meat, which is beans, tofu, nuts and seeds, fruits, vegetables. And it's based on a 3-4-5 plan, so your breakfast is 300 calories, your lunch is 400 calories, and your dinner is 500. And so where do we go with this? What are the directions? At this time, we think that knowledge of a person's microbiome might eventually aid in the management of disease, including MS. There's still a lot of uncertainty about this. We need human studies. We need to confirm any effects of dietary intervention. We don't have that, and see how it could modulate the gut. And in summary, when you look at what experts have to say, fruits and vegetables deliver important nutrients. They have vitamins, potassium, C, fiber, antioxidants. There's good research to show that eating 7 or more servings is associated with a 42% lower risk of death compared to those who just eat 1 serving a day. And so health experts agree on incorporating ample produce in the diet to reduce your risk of chronic disease. So on that note, I was talking to Minnie the other day. Minnie's here with us. And I said, Minnie, what are your favorite foods? What do you eat? So Robert, her husband, says, Minnie really likes smoothies. So I asked him what he puts in it. And these are some of the things. So this entire week, I've been experimenting with smoothies. And so I call this one Minnie's Mighty Smoothie, and it has a banana, apple. I did peel the apple because the first time I put it, apple in, the pieces got stuck even in my throat. So I know there's some nutrients in the skin or under the skin, but for the sake of the smoothie, I peeled the apple. I peeled a pear. And if you ever liked comfort food, like just eating, you know, if you were going to go for a plate of ice cream or something, or mashed potatoes that you call comfort food, putting that pear in it made a world of difference. It was like drinking a smoothie like baby food or something. And then coconut milk, you could substitute almond milk, you could substitute, there are lots of low-calorie beverages out on the market these days. And then greens. This is what makes it green. And I found that the baby spinach or the baby kale that you buy, you can get it in a big plastic container. It's already washed 3 times. And it just blends up. This is using a blender, not a juicer, so you don't need any fancy equipment. And I have a juicer, but I abandoned it lately because it makes so much pulp. You have to clean all these different parts. Where you make the smoothie, it's just one container and it's easy to swallow. So I found this very delicious. And this is kind of the basics of a recipe. The other thing I would say is blend up the contents first before you put in the greens, because you don't want to macerate those greens and destroy them too much. So you blend everything first, put the greens in the last minute, then blend it up again and put in a straw and have a great time. And now we're ready for some questions and answers. The question is, what about kefir? So kefir is a fermented product. It's quite delicious. I drink it regularly myself. Find a brand that doesn't have like sweetener added to it or artificial substances in it, and then enjoy. It's like a liquid yogurt almost. And I know one of my youthful patients with MS really likes it. What about kimchi? That's perfectly fine too. That's used in Asian cooking, another fermented product, and will also help your microbiome. And fermented foods, yes, in general, they're good. So those two fit into the category of fermented foods. Okay, go for them. Yeah.
Are olives, I know pickles are fermented, so is sauerkraut, but olives considered fermented too or not?
Olives, not so much. But you have to be careful with the sauerkraut that you choose, and the pickles. I wouldn't use pickles that are store-bought or in a jar that have nitrates added and coloring or whatever. But if you remember, when I was a kid growing up, we used to be able to go to the pickle stand and buy those fermented, fresh pickles. Some of them were half sour, full sour. And the sauerkraut, even myself, I used to make my own sauerkraut. I haven't done that for a really long time. But cutting the cabbage and adding salt and then letting it drain and then rinsing it. So you want a good brand fermented cabbage, not just going to the hot dog stand and buying whatever they have with, you know, additives in it. Naturally fermented. And there are cookbooks that'll tell you how to do that. How does coffee, tea, and high pH affect the microbiome? That's a really good question. So most of these diets would advocate against coffee and tea. However, I think personally, my belief is that 1 cup of either is fine. There's, you know, coffee can give you that little extra kick, and that's my opinion. How does lemon water offset this effect? Well, fruit is great. So go for lemon, go for lime. Don't add the sugar again and make it lemonade. There's a whole host of literature also on what's considered appropriate sweeteners and not appropriate sweeteners. We could talk about some of these topics for 2 months. But in terms of those questions, that would be my opinion.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rauchway.